Welcome. This is Brian Russell, your Lunch and Learn coordinator for the PMI Western Idaho chapter. Thank you for joining us today for the May session of our Lunch and Learn. In a minute, I'll do a quick introduction for Heather and Nick. You can see both of our presenters on the screen today. Before we get started, please take a look in the session Q&A. I do have a question out there for our PMI attendees about Lunch and Learn potential sessions for July and August. Take a read of that question. If you would just respond to that answer or answer that question in that session Q&A so that we can then roll up the feedback to the chapter leadership team as well. So take a look at that and let us know about your interest in extending the Lunch and Learns for July and August. We typically take those 2 months off, but take a look at that. And if you would respond to that question, even if you responded last month, I wanted to get a fresh review of that. And particularly, we're exploring in-person or virtual as we normally do. If there's one that makes a difference to you, just make that comment or answer that question as well. So today we're gonna learn from Nick and Heather about building great business cases. If you attended the PMI Professional Development Day recently, Heather was one of our breakout session leaders. And so with that, I have invited her and Nick to come and speak to us about building great business cases. A little bit about Heather. Heather's had more than 25 years of experience working with thousands of customers and securing hundreds of millions of product funding. Early in her career, she was successful at rapidly growing startup organizations, and over the past 15 plus years, she's had a record of aligning diverse teams to deliver value for customers and strategies for organizations, all through having a focus on solving customers' needs to achieve business outcomes. And for Nick, he's also the co-founder of Listen, Evolve, Inspire. Man, I'm having a hard time talking today. Nick is passionate about human-centered and customer-driven innovation. His 15 years of experience working on both the agency and client side have helped over hundreds of clients transform their innovation and product management strategies and methods. He believes that giving entrepreneurs the proper governance, structure, and environment to innovate and redesign outdated product management best practices will enable companies to drive measurable business impact and produce products their customers love. So with that, I'd like to welcome Heather and Nick to our PMI Lunch and Learn, and let's hear about building great business cases.
Thank you so much, Brian. I really appreciate the intro. And thank you everyone who made it today. And you're spending this hour with Nick and myself. We truly appreciate your time. We are going to talk about building a great business case and what goes into that and what then leads to a great pitch. Last year we started Listen, Evolve, Inspire because really we teach these methods within our own company. We both work at Cisco Systems. And the teachings really are more in a mentorship type of an offering because in our full-time jobs, we innovate on customer problems and what could help solve their problems, and also building products or programs or services for our customers around the globe. And sometimes it's a segment, sometimes it's a specific type of industry, but we really are focused on practicing what we're going to talk about today really every day. And so because we've been doing this quite a lot for many years, we decided to extend our teachings to external audiences. And we do that and offer our different teachings in our community. We are hosted in the Mighty Networks community. You'll see on the very back page how to get into that community. It's free, and you could get extra guidance and help. Also, there are webinars that we offer, and then there could be private consulting engagements depending on specific problems that customers need, or we have videos and digital guides. We will be launching a YouTube community, but we haven't gotten there yet. There's just a lot to do. So let's dive in. The mindset and tactical aspects of building a great business case have to come together. Now, you might say, what the heck do these two things have to do with building a great business case? But it's everything to us. And so these two critical components are all about achieving your goals and evolving your career and your personal development. So it's really a very layered set of opportunities that you have in front of you if you were to combine the skills to achieve that. Now, we're going to talk about soft skills. We're going to talk about why your mindset matters and the balance between the tactical and the mindset. The mindset side is about soft skills, and we're going to talk about how you can achieve that and how you can practice that every day in order to achieve your business case goals. When we talk about soft skills, this is your emotional intelligence quotient. Sorry, Brian, you're rubbing off on me. But the emotional intelligence quotient is a balance with your intellectual quotient, right? Your EQ and your IQ. And so the development of those soft skills are critical because you want to have stakeholder alignment. You want to earn the trust and inspire commitment. And when you lean really deeply into your soft skills and developing those, as well as taking the learnings and the teachings that Nick is going to review with you in a little bit, it's about then getting the evidence to support your business case, because then between building relationships and showing that you did your due diligence, you then have this really solid, rock solid business case. So our challenge to you this 2023, we're almost halfway into 2023, but we wanted to offer a challenge of really developing a balance of EQ and IQ. And if you are going to focus on the first two, you come around to achieving the third objective that we have on this slide here. Getting to know your stakeholders is all about spending time knowing who you're working with on a day-to-day basis. Ask them, find out what they do outside of their work. What books do they love to read and why? Do they have any suggestions? I'm always asking my stakeholder team relationships what types of books they're reading and why do they love them. Movies and shows are also a fun way in which you can get to know your stakeholders and the individuals you work with on a day-to-day basis. It's really important that when you come to a meeting, you're not just talking about work, right? There has to be some personal element. We spend so much time with certain people in our business lives. And the other part is when you know what their goals are and what drives their objectives, you start to gain alignment, because if you know what they're goaled on, if you know what their management is goaling them to do and achieve, and if you can start to align with their objectives or align your objectives with what they have on their plate and what they're supposed to be achieving, you start to have this good balance between who you work with on a day-to-day basis and how together you can reach success. And so that third component is, what do your stakeholders need from you to be all in? Do you have a good relationship with them? And do all of your objectives and programs align? And that's a big deal when it comes down to assigning budget for your programs or product or services, and also committing to the timelines. right? And so that's what we're talking about when you are starting to develop these relationships. Now, when you talk about the relationship, we call it builder and connector. It's choosing to put effort into building your relationships, which will require new skills, right? So you're evolving your skills and your daily practice about caring about who someone is or being a little bit vulnerable. Everyone has difficult days. Just being a little bit more human makes a big difference in terms of earning the great trust and relationship. And so those long-term relationships need your vulnerability. They need to be trustworthy. There needs to be this element of, I've got you. I know what you need, and I'm going to help you achieve that. Together, we can achieve our goals that we've set out together, right? And so you build that two-way relationship. Now, frankly, if all you do is go to someone when you need something, there's going to be some resentment that gets built up, right? So don't always go to your stakeholders when you need something. Build that relationship, because just like family or friends, your professional relationships don't like to be only, counseled when you need something. There has to be this give and take. Now, your short-term relationships also are critical, right? So building your future, you never know who you're going to come in contact with in the future. And so it's really, an opportunity to make sure you treat these relationships as investments, not only in your future, but in your professional future and any recommendations that might come from these other relationships. Because if you're going to try and achieve something different and you come across a short-term relationship you've just had in the future, they might actually recommend you to other peers that they work with on a regular basis. So don't forget about those short-term relationships. Now, I don't mean to talk extensively about only your soft skills, but one more aspect that we want to make sure you cover and that you have in your mind is the long path to achieve success. So be patient with yourself as you practice new soft skills, right? So adopting the skills, it takes time if you commit to it. So you might want to pick a couple things that you're going to try in the month of May and June, right? What are the things I'm going to do differently? Am I going to ask someone about a give and take, about what would it take in order for us to agree? And so that's an element of negotiation. Or is it how you get to know your stakeholders? So pick a couple things that you're going to start to practice, and you're going to start layering on these new soft skills. It makes a difference when you start getting the tactical side of your business completed as well. So no one's going to be perfect. Your knowledge about what to do and what you've practiced might not always go well. So know that any mistakes you make is okay, right? You can come back to the person and say, I made a mistake. I apologize, or listen, I didn't come across the way that I wanted to. Just be vulnerable. Say, let's start again, or is it okay if we have this conversation again? But repair any sort of mistakes that you may have made in an engagement or in a conversation you had with one of your stakeholders, because that will start to build your allies. It will start to build your relationships, and they will see that you care about how you treat someone or talk with someone or build that relationship. And then you might actually find that you build an ally in your pitch, right? So when there are 2 or 3 of you that are pitching your business case, it adds so much more a leadership acumen that you have built these relationships, as well as credibility. This person is pitching this with other people. There's the credibility that you actually built these relationships, and the authenticity comes through. Okay, so when you achieve that and that practice happens, you'll start to gain momentum, and then you'll start to have the ability to set team expectations, and people authentically want to be on the same page, and they want to move forward together, because you've taken the time to negotiate alignment, to earn their commitment through being a partner with them. And then that commitment means that you truly have team cohesion, right? And that you have a validation of deliverables. Now, Nick's going to talk about the validation of deliverables because that's equally as important here. And that user-focused outcomes is really kind of the next second half of what we're teaching. So I wanted, before we dive into Act 1, 2, and 3, for Nick to go through his tactical component of this presentation. Cheryl, would you post the poll for number 1, which is the soft skills, for me, please? Please take a moment to look at the question that we've posted, and it really is relevant to the soft skills I just talked about and how much time you're putting into that. We really appreciate your feedback, and we're just curious about how often you have an opportunity to develop your soft skills.
Heather, I'm assuming you can see the poll results. I think you have to actually vote before you can see them.
Okay.
But right now it's showing 2/3 are weekly.
Oh, good.
About 20% is monthly, and then the rest are quarterly or annually.
Amazing. Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Okay, that's excellent. So thanks for taking the poll. Nick, I'm going to turn it over to you. You can let me know. I will advance the slides, so take it away.
Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised by the the poll results there. So it's good to see that folks are able to take that time on the mindset, because we obviously spent a decent amount of time talking about that, because we can give you all the tactical things, the best practices, the tips and tricks, right? But if you don't have the ability to connect with the people that you need to, it becomes very difficult to implement some of these very tactical things. So that's the reason why we emphasize and spend a lot of time talking about it. So as Heather mentioned, a lot of this building of a business case is around telling a story. And, the way that we think about it is in sort of, if you want to think about how we've structured our methodology, which is the reason for our company, which is listen, evolve, and inspire. And that is all around the process to get to the favorable outcome for you, whether it's building, that pitch and that business case to get the funding that you need to move on, right? And just if you think about it in 3 acts, right? It's like a screenplay. That's kind of how we've separated it out. And when you think about the first act of what we call our the methodology of around listen, that is all around problem validation. So your entire focus in the beginning is to gain a better understanding of what it is that you're trying to solve for. Now, whether you're a project manager focusing on a program, a product, a service, whatever it might be, your job is to deeply understand what the problem or opportunity is. So you can think about it as an opportunity as well. It's kind of problem and opportunity are like opposite sides of the same coin. It's effectively the same thing. But there's either a problem you need to go out and solve, or there's an opportunity that you've been asked to go out and go catch, or whatever it might be, or go explore. And so you can ask yourself, well, why haven't we explored this before? Who else is exploring in this space? So the entire Act 1 is around understanding what's in front of you, getting a lay of the land. What's the chessboard look like? And so that's we'll talk a little bit about that when we get there. Act 2 is all around, okay, now that we understand what the lay of the land looks like, and we've spoken to enough people to really feel confident, we validated that we're solving for we're going to go after the right thing. Now, how do we solve for that? Okay, so you kind of think about what's the next evolution of how do we get there, right? We don't want to just go to where we are today. How do we future-proof, or how do we get even further beyond where we need to be today. So that's kind of like evolve your program, your product, your service into that next level. And then finally, once you have that, and that's been validated as well, so people like the solution you're about to put out, how do you inspire people to come with you on that journey, storytell in a way that it gets that alignment, brings everybody together creatively through visuals, and then go make your pitch, right? So how do you inspire people to go get the funding you need to go out and build that business case to get there? So, all right, Heather, let's move on to the deep dive on Act 1. So Act 1, as I mentioned, is all around listening, and it's the intent here and the purpose here is to gain a deep understanding of the problem, as I mentioned before. That is the key here. So we'll go next slide. And the quote that I would say I use, I don't want to say on a weekly basis, but gosh, it's a lot, right? Like it probably is on a weekly basis because the customers that I talk to. So this is one from Einstein, and I'll read it to you because it's such a powerful thing. He said, if I had an hour to save the world, I would spend 55 minutes on understanding the problem and 5 minutes on the solution. So why, right? The key here is why is that mindset? Why did he say that? It's all around, once you have that deep understanding of what problem you're really trying to solve, there is only a finite amount of solutions, right? It's not like there's an infinite way of solving something. That's usually not the case. Once you've gone to like the end of the earth, basically, and really validated all the problems that you're trying to solve, the ones that are going to be the most impactful, and the ones that have been, validated from the customer, there's really only a handful of solutions that you can think about on how to evolve your product to the next level. So that's why it's so important to really deeply, deeply, deeply understand the problem. And you've probably heard of this other quote too, which is something like a lot of entrepreneurs struggle with, which is they fall in love with their solutions and not the problem. So people always say, fall in love with the problem you're trying to solve, not your actual solution. So anyway, we'll go on to the next slide here. So there's a bunch of different tips we could give you. We only have a finite amount of time here. So we wanted to cover with you today what we believe is one of the most powerful tools in your arsenal of things you can use, and probably one that maybe you might not be using as much as you should be using, which is around interviewing, okay? Now there's, again, a bunch of different ways to kind of think about interviewing, but we wanted to give you a couple tips, and we have more, as Heather mentioned, in our community, and there's a bunch of other places you can find some. But we wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about what are those tips today that maybe you haven't thought about, or that we can give you to go out and implement immediately right away. So think about doing this as a group effort. So if you have to think about, all right, what is the problem that we're exploring? Generally, most people work in team environments, right? You're a project manager, or a program manager, or whatever it might be, a product manager. You're working amongst the team. It's important to do this in collaboration with everybody. So first thing to do is gather everybody together and start drafting out the questions you want to ask people, and identify which questions should go for which people you want to ask them to. Sounds rather logical, but most people do not spend the time crafting questions ahead of time so that you're prepared and are really thoughtful about every question you're asking somebody. Because if you have 30 minutes to like understand what are their pain points, or what's working and what's not working, most people don't have a structured set of questions, and you're kind of wasting a lot of time. So think about it and come prepared around the questions you want to ask somebody. And while we're on the topic of the questions you want to ask somebody, think about whether how you can phrase those in a way that are more open-ended versus yes/no questions. Because yes/no questions, while they do answer the question, they don't leave a lot of freedom for the user, the person that you're interviewing, to really expand on the conversation, right? So if I said, did you have a great day today? It's kind of like, yeah, yes or no. But you could say something like, tell me in, 5 minutes how your day was. That's a little more open-ended. Granted, we still gave them a time frame of maybe 5 minutes, but it gives them a lot more freedom to talk about more things about their day. Okay, number 2. This is one where if you're doing a ton of interviews, and again, there's a ton we could talk about interviews, but when you're doing a bunch of interviews, and as you should do a bunch of interviews, it's very difficult to keep track of everything a user said. So asking the users if you can record the interviews, and sometimes they'll agree to it, sometimes they won't, just depends on whether maybe they have NDAs or whatever it might be that they don't feel comfortable with. Just ask them if you can record, because capturing the exact words of what a user said are really important. So if I were to say, yeah, that's really painful, or wow, that is extremely painful, there's a difference between that's really painful and that's extremely painful. Now, to you, it may not seem subtle, but words matter, and those small details will make a huge difference when you start to group your notes together. Again, ask if other people, as you're doing those interviews, are there other people we should be talking to, right? So if you have a captive audience, you're interviewing somebody, ask the question, thank you for your time. Is there anybody else who you think would be relevant for us to speak to in this regard? They'll likely give you some pretty good people to talk to. So that's a great way to just start to build other people and rally other folks to help you build a cohesive story. Always schedule time afterwards. So if you have like an hour interview, block an hour and 15 minutes on your calendar so that those 15 minutes afterwards, you have a chance to digest, get your thoughts together, clean up some of your notes, because you're probably frantically taking a bunch of notes while those interviews are happening. So it gives you that extra 15 minutes to decompress after an interview, so you're not jumping between meetings, and you have an opportunity to collect your thoughts and kind of organize and structure, because if you try to do it at the end of the day, you will forget things and you'll miss things, and it's much harder to kind of clean up a lot of your interview notes. So again, schedule an extra 15 minutes right after to help you kind of structure that time. Probably the most important thing is number 3 here on this entire slide that I want you to walk away with, which is the question of why. Now, when you're asking a lot of your open-ended questions, users will give you hopefully some good information there, right? But generally speaking, when folks give you the answer to your question, they're not including the why behind their answer. And that is really where a lot of the gold comes from when you're trying to deeply understand a problem or an opportunity, is the why behind something. And so there's a lot of methodologies out there. Maybe some are familiar with like the 5 whys, but getting to the root of why somebody actually does something and the reasoning behind that is way more powerful than their original answer to something. So anyway, that's probably the most important thing I can think of. And again, it's not like when you're on the interviews with folks, you're like a 5-year-old, like why? Like it gets a little painful, but you can think about ways to ask intelligent follow-up questions, looking to explore further and go deeper on that. And a kind of a fun one at the very end of every interview we always ask is like a magic wand type of question, which is, if we were to grant you 3 wishes, what would you say we could do better in it? Whether it's product, service, program, project, whatever it might be. It gives users a pretty different way, we found, of thinking about coming up with some solutions. So that's kind of as deep as we could go on just one topic on interview. And Heather, let's go ahead and move over to the next slide here. And again, the listen act, the act of listening in Act 1, there's so much there. We can't cover it all, obviously, but we try to just come up with a few things here around. Once you've gathered all those notes and you've summarized everything, try to do it in a way, as Heather mentioned, around creating those kind of sub-deliverables, because there's going to be so much information there. You're going to try to want to compartmentalize everything that you found into like kind of different deliverables in different buckets, right? So, a project is made up of multiple different components. And so immediately after all your notes and everything, try to summarize everything into like different compartments. That's number 1. Number 2, then go socialize this. Can't emphasize this enough. the entire way around building an evidence-based and an alignment-driven business case is the fact that you've socialized the work that you've done and everyone is on board. So take what you've done, socialize that with your other, key stakeholders, present quotes that people said, all the different scenarios that folks have, come to you, maybe different use cases you didn't think about, all those kind of anecdotal stories, bring those and summarize them and share them and socialize them with your stakeholders. The last thing I will say before you move on to, from Act 1 to Act 2, and you can even bring this number 3 item here into the socialization as well, is creating what we like to call how might we prompts. And those are a really fantastic way of, you had your original problem you set out to achieve, or your original opportunity you set out to achieve, but how might we prompts, and it's all it really says is like, you take the original problem and you reframe it based on everything you've been, all your interview notes, and you try to reframe the problem in as many different ways as possible, using the start of every problem as how might we. So every reframe of the problem starts with how might we, and then you just reform and refactor the problem based on what you heard multiple different times. And that helps you lead into ideation. You have multiple different ways about thinking about the same problem. So it's a really cool activity that we use all the time to help explore and expand your thinking when it comes to the problem or opportunity you have on hand. Okay, moving on to Act 2. So evolve. So you're always doing it for a purpose. So what's the purpose here? It's to ideate and create amazing, delightfully designed product, service, or programs, right? That's the goal. You've captured everything. Now you want to ideate and you want to design to delight. That's the key. So, all right, next slide. No good presentation doesn't have a good Steve Jobs quote, and this one is super powerful because I think it helps people think about design differently. A lot of people have a stigma around design being aesthetics, which there is an element of that, but that's not really the way we think about design. And if you're familiar with design thinking, this is kind of like the crux of design thinking here, which is it is not about what something looks like or feels like. It's actually how something works. The design is around how something works. And that is super, super powerful because on that Act 1, when you're listening, you're basically understanding how something works, how the problem doesn't work today, or how the opportunity might look like. You're sort of gathering that evidence and that knowledge to be able to then create an amazing solution and then being able to articulate how that will work. So, okay, next slide. Around delighting a design. So it's not just good to just do something. You want to do something to delight, like as best as you possibly can, right? So the thing to think about here is, okay, who do we need and where do we need to do this? So you might be thinking, well, that doesn't make any, that's kind of confusing. What do we mean by that? So it's really important to get a diverse and inclusive set of people to brainstorm. Diversity, inclusion of different minds, people, expertise, all coming together to ideate around a problem. You've probably been in a room where somebody who came, probably maybe didn't even really know the problem very well, but understood it enough to participate, came up with like a really good idea, or at least the start of something. They may not be able to nail it exactly, but they kind of got the gist of it. And you're like, oh, wow, we didn't really think about that. That's the reason why you bring in people who are not, working on everything day in and day out, because you're usually a little too fixed-minded on, the boundaries that you have, and it's important to bring in people outside. Another thing to consider is when you're working on these business cases and you're working in, people working like sprint cycles and all these different things, depending on what you're trying to achieve and how big of a business case it might be, or what you're working towards, whether it's a quarterly budget plan or it's like a yearly, think about whether to do things nowadays. You talk about virtual and on-site, be strategic about that. So if you're working on like a huge project and it's, massive and, whatever, it's like a huge evolution of something, it might be worthwhile literally bringing everybody on site. But for those sort of maybe smaller projects, think about if you can pull off a virtual workshop. I just did one for 2 straight days. They were 6 hours a piece. Yes, that sounds painful, but with built-in breaks, you can do this pretty well virtually. So just kind of point that out. Number 2, when we think about solving for the problem, it's really important to be able to go to that next level. So an elevator pitch is great, right? Because it sort of at a high level gives everybody an understanding of what the idea is to kind of move forward, right? Like, here's why we need to do this. We have a great idea. This is how we plan on implementing it in whatever, 20 seconds or less. But what's important here is when you double click on that idea and you can articulate perfectly how this solves the problem that the users are facing or the opportunity we want to go after, that brings credibility more than anything else. Because generally when you go in to build a business case and you're pitching for funding or whatever it might be, oftentimes you will get those double click questions where somebody will want to like kind of poke and see, okay, how much, how deep did they go? How what's my confidence level that they went to that level where they understand and can say it with confidence because it's validated that this is actually worthwhile doing, that this is something that we can do. And so the last thing I'll say here in B is that you can talk for 45 minutes describing something in great detail. But what's even more powerful is being able to do that in a simplified way. So not bringing in complexity into a solution is really important. If you can describe something simply, means you understand it really, really well. And being able to articulate that to your stakeholders simply will eliminate a lot of the confusion and a lot of the like scope creep and all that. So focus on trying to figure out, once you have a good idea of where you're going with something, can we simplify the solution for our engineers, for whoever? It's some people have to make something or whatever it might be. There's a lot of reasons why simplifying your solution is the best thing you can do. And then the last thing is, okay, so you have the idea, you've simplified it as much as possible. How do you go and validate that this is actually, again, something worth doing? So you'll notice that every one of these steps, it's all about validation. You do something, you validate before you move on. So that's kind of the thought process. And so with this one, it's interesting because you have there's a whole lot of things you can do. But anyways, one of the things that we talk a lot about is called rapid prototyping. And for those of you who might or might not be familiar, there's a really good book called Lean Startup, and it talks about how do you rapidly build a prototype. So how you build something that you can measure and learn from very quickly. So it's a build, measure, learn feedback loop. So how do you build something really small? Doesn't have to be, you don't have to build the whole product or the whole service or the whole program. But if you can just, give people the vision for that and get their validation before you move on, again, that is more power for you to use when you're building your downstream story, that you have a user validated idea or solution that people care about and want. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. So as a summary here, again, there's multiple different activities that you do inside the evolve phase, but we talked a little bit about workshop here. But again, it's all about getting the right people in the room, spending the appropriate amount of time to get to a solution. Oftentimes, it might even take more than one session at a time, because when you sit down and you start ideating and you're working on an idea, you do hit, even just like writers they hit writer's block. You do sort of hit this point where you go, we're done for now. But if you allow a little bit of time to digest and pick it back up the next day, you might find that you've slept on it overnight and you think back, you're like, oh my gosh, we totally missed this like important thing. So that's another little tip too. When you do on-site ideation, you always have like an overnight, or if you can plan to have an overnight so that there's like a follow-on or knockoff effect for the next morning. Again, doubling down on the rapid prototyping, there's a concept around pretendotyping. And basically that's effectively the same thing as a rapid prototype, although prototypes sometimes can be a little bit further down the line. So that's actually something that could work. A pretendotype is kind of what it sounds like. You're kind of pretending that you've done something, but it's completely like fake, right? It's like absolutely fake. And there are amazing, with the advancements in AI, and I know everyone's probably familiar with a lot of things out there these days, but there's a lot of really good generative AI tools out there that you can type in, as an example, right? If you go to Adobe Firefly, there's a new beta program out there, and you can type in a script for a story. So you would say something like, let's imagine that a user is sitting in a coffee shop and they get met with a server who wants to take their order, and you can type this in. You can type in a storyline, and it will create a visual storyboard of that in real time. Okay, so trying to make something visual and pretend like you've thought it all through and that it's all working. There are amazing AI tools out there that can speed you up from like 0 to 60 in no time. It requires no amount of coding required. There's phenomenal tools out there. But again, the last thing in this step, as we mentioned, is socialize. You can do all this work, but if you do not get out there, again, go back to your stakeholders, get them bought in again on all the work that you've done, show them the solutions, get their feedback before you go to the users again and say, hey, we've thought of these amazing ideas. Are we on point here? Do we have your buy-in? That is the important part of this. And you'll see, as Heather said, like, the relationship building part of this is so critical because you're constantly going back to those same stakeholders over and over again. But if you're coming to them with, hey, we've gone to the next milestone, here's the work that we validated with our users, we want to share that with you. Do you have any feedback? Can we change something? What can be? It's a collaborative environment, so we're everyone's on board on telling that story together. That's the key. Okay, next slide, Heather. Yes, so there we go. We get to the point where we actually need to inspire. We got to create those visuals. We have to get out there and wow our customers, right? So let's go to the next slide. Thank you, Heather. So this is, again, I don't know if it's often overlooked, but there's always room for a great story. And you can take the same information and I can put you in front of somebody and you deliver the pitch, and I can take that same information and have a an award-winning screenwriter draft up with the same content and tell a really impactful story in a completely different way. And I'm sure most people are probably gonna go, wow, that was so incredible, it was so amazing. Yes, because the power of how to tell a story really does matter, and if you can create the visuals that go along with it, it is extremely powerful. So I know you may not have the time to always do this and bring in visuals and really tell like a really impactful story, but our job here is to at least try to get you thinking about that, right? How could you do it? So, okay, Heather, let's move on to the next slide here. Oh, I think I'm on a delay. Okay, so how do we create those powerful stories, right? So, you've got to bring in the different narratives from the users. That's probably the biggest thing you can do, is making what you've done and all the previous steps, right? When you've listened and evolved and you've validated all that work, bringing that to the very forefront of your stories. That's it. Like those, whether it's a quote, whether it's data, you ran a survey, whatever it is, bring that customer-driven data insight right in front of it, right? And have that front and center for your story. Number 2, follow the formula. Here it is. This is it. Number 2 is the formula. In order. Now, some people will argue with this. I'm telling you, I've done this. We've done this so many times. Stick to this script. This is your best chance of doing it. In order, outline what's the problem, what's the solution, what's the impact, and then make your ask. Some people start with the ask and work backwards. I get that. And if it depends on your company culture, if that's what you guys do, go for it. But I can tell you, most people need the time, the ramp up time, to understand where we started from, how you're going to get there, why it's important, what's the impact for me. Okay, now tell me what this is going to cost me, right? That's generally the formula that works every time. And then again, as I already spoken to this, make it visual if you can. it really is powerful. If nothing else, it gives people something to react to. I can tell you an idea, and it could be the most simplified, well-articulated idea in history just through the use of my words, but I can throw you a photo or a video, a 10-second video of something, and it's immediately much more visceral for people to understand what I'm talking about. And you know the quote of, picture's worth 1,000 words. So try as much as possible to try to use visuals in a way to tell your story. And with that, let's go to the last slide here. Yep. So again, everything is around validating, socializing. You got to build your last kind of business case, and then it's your pitch. I'm running out of time, but I just wanted to kind of leave a little bit of time here at the end in case there's any kind of questions that we didn't get to. But this is it, right? This is your opportunity to take everything that you've done, one last socializing with your stakeholders, and then you got to build that amazing business case. That's it. But it should be really simple at this point because you have all the information. You're just stitching it together, and then go deliver it. That's it. You should feel super confident when you step in to pitch your business case. At this point, it shouldn't really be that surprising. You should kind of already know your outcome because you have all the key stakeholders there. They should be the ones also fighting for you and alongside you. And yes, it's never going to be 100%. There's always going to be budget cuts. There's always going to be things that come up. But this is your best chance of what we have seen, best chance of success in sort of delivering against your business case. So a lot of information packed in there. I recognize that, but we wanted to make it as valuable as possible for you all and cram it as much as possible. So hopefully we did that for you. I don't know if there were any other Q&A that you saw.
I didn't see any questions. If anyone has a question before we go to the next poll again, we can do that. We can answer some questions. You can just put them in the chat. But you just one other additional leave behind. There are a lot of templates and data points that we suggest in other aspects in our community and other places, but there are always going to be a pattern of what your users are saying needs to be evolved with a product, a service, a program. And so by going out and getting that quantifiable amount of feedback, you will start to see wonderful patterns. And it's what Nick and I have found to be the most effective to say, okay, these are the top priorities of the problems that should be solved and funded. And so it's all about then verifying and sharing that information with your stakeholders, as Nick mentioned, to make sure that they truly understand this is the data that is shared. And one of the things that he talked about was representation of information, infographics, or you could use any type of picture or visualization. Play around with it, have fun, right? Find a way in which you're going to evoke this emotional reaction from your sponsors, from your stakeholder leadership about not only the alignment, but what needs to be funded. So I think Brian and Cheryl, we could start the next poll. And
okay. By the way, thank you, Nick. That terrific, really good insight on the tactical aspects of building the business case. And I love the quotes that you have used. They really are thought-provoking.
Great.
All right, we have another poll out there. How well do you validate all the deliverables in your business case? I think we're getting lots of sometimes.
Yeah, and I would say that's pretty common, right? I would say most people feel like they do it reasonably well. And that's great, right? I think the difference between good and great is going that extra mile, right? And we have seen that. That is by far I can count on probably, I don't know about you, Heather, but I can count on maybe 2 hands at most the number of projects that when I've pitched for funding. Now, sometimes we kill our own,
Programs, yeah.
programs, because we don't even let it get to the point of pitching. And we've done it to the point where I built up enough credibility and and presented information to kill a project or kill a program with evidence that now, like, my reputation. So when we go in front and we have the evidence and we're pitching for funding, we have so much credibility. Our team has so much credibility that we rarely, I can probably count on maybe 2 hands total the number of times that we've not gotten the funding that we wanted, just based on the fact that it's evidence based and we've done all the legwork. So yeah, I mean, it's great to see that most people have validated that. But anyway, it's good. I don't know if Heather, you have anything.
No, it's true. Once you start to build that reputation of having the due diligence that supports your funding ask, it makes all the difference in the world. And also, if resources change and you've lost commitment, trying to go back to make sure that they understand how that's going to impact the program and how it could or couldn't be successful is really critical too. So resetting the expectation, if something changes in terms of people who can work on the program or project, it's important to go back to your stakeholders and say, let's just sync because something's changed, right?
Right.
All right, Brian,
Very
back
good.
to you. Is there anything else?
So it looks like on the poll,
it
looks like that it was almost 73%. Sometimes we validate, and then a handful of votes and nail it every time, as well as we have never been able to validate well. So that's what we ended up with in the mix.
Okay.
Heather, anything you want to share on this last slide here? It looks like there's an opportunity for folks to connect with your organization.
Yes, we have many different ways for you to connect with us so that you can get deeper knowledge and additional assistance. You could either join the first little QR code with the triangle in it. It will bring you to a page where we actually offer a free guide that talks a lot about this. You just enter your email address and then you can get additional emails from us that give you deeper insights and help you. So you can join our email guidance list. The other one with the radio signal QR code is our Mighty Network community. You may join that and you can ask us questions in there. There are all kinds of ways in which you can engage with us for specifics. The link down below, if someone wants consultation, very specific NDA-driven consultation, we can offer that as well. So you can send us an email off of our website, and the website is there. So feel free to engage us that way as well.
Excellent.
And I'll just say one more thing, as and it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek and it's kind of a joke, but the information that we've provided for you today and that we do on all of our guides and videos and stuff, it's not generated by ChatGPT. This is real people telling you real information in the trenches with you guys every day. We live and breathe this stuff. And so, that's our approach to this, is making it human and sharing what works that we do every day, day in and day out. So a little tongue in cheek, but just thought we'd throw that out there. You're not going to get anything from AI from our standpoint.
Very good. Yep. All right. Well, thank you. For the attendees, just a reminder that we will be sharing the presentation that Heather and Nick talked about today. We'll be sharing that in email within the next week, along with the usual instructions on claiming your continuing education credit for this hour. Yeah. Again, Nick, Heather, thank you for your time. We do appreciate it. And for the attendees, thank you for your participation as well. Go out and have a great rest of your day. Take care.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, everybody.
You're welcome.